here anymore. I'm done with him this season. Woo. All right, excellent. Effective Christianity, as we continue our series. Tonight, if I remember correctly, I believe this is number 9 in our series, Effective Representation. This particular study tonight will be a bit unique. I want you to turn in your Bibles to Psalm 89. Psalm 89. As we begin, by way of introduction. Psalm 89, verse number 7. Somebody that's willing, please read that out loud for us. Psalm 89, verse 7.
God is greatly to be feared in the assembly of the saints, and to be had in reverence of all them that are about him.
Excellent. In the assembly of the saints, God is to be revered. What we want to study tonight, what I'd like to study, and I hope, and I know this is kind of one of those subjects, we've not discussed it yet, and it's a subject that may be a bit of a can of worms. I hope not, but I hope that we can appreciate the purpose behind this particular study. There are many ways that we could talk about reverencing God, that we could talk about how we represent ourselves. But what I want to talk about tonight in particular is how we reverence God in our dress. And before I open this up, what I mean by that, I want to preface this study by saying this lesson is not about being wrong or right based upon your attire, such as, if you wear blue jeans to services, you're a sinner and you're going to be lost. That's not what this study is about. But what this study is about, hopefully, will be an interesting way to look through the Bible and see how God views dress and how that dress communicates to those around us. Would you say true or false to begin, to know that we're on the same page to begin with here? True or false, our dress communicates to others. Absolutely true. Maybe somebody give us an example. What's a way that your dress communicates a message without you even saying a word? David?
A guy in a military uniform.
Guy in a military uniform. Excellent. You see a guy in a military uniform, and what does that say? He's in the military. That's right. It lets you know immediately who he is. There's a significance to that, isn't there? That's a great example. Larry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say a policeman.
A policeman, excellent. Yeah, he's got his uniform on, and so you know sometimes based on what people are wearing who they are, what their occupation is, what they're all about. Maybe you've seen someone who is walking down the street. Maybe it's a young lady and she is very, very scantily clad. Right? Do you think to yourself, there is a young, faithful Christian lady walking down the street? Probably not. Right? I would ask you what you think, but I think we all think of that person the same way. That they're giving an image that says something that's very inappropriate, right? You don't think of them as... So dress gives a message. Here's the reason I want to do this study, just to hopefully bring out some interesting discussion. Number one, our dress communicates something to God. And this may surprise a lot of folks, as it surprised myself in preparing this study. Begin with me in Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3. Again, this study is not designed to attack those who don't wear a suit and tie to service. This is just designed simply to better understand how God and how the Bible views dress. And I hope it will be one of great benefit, and how we represent Christianity in the world around us, not just in the assembly. Exodus 3 and verse number 5. Moses, the burning bush, as you recall, what was God's request? Probably don't even have to read it, as I imagine you remember. What did God ask that Moses do when he was standing at the burning bush? To take his shoes off. Take off your sandals. Take them off, because where you are standing is what? Holy ground. Why is it, have you ever studied this or kind of thought about it, why is it that God would care whether or not Moses had his sandals on his feet? Was God just being a control kind of person, just wanted to be in control and just made this up to see if Moses would obey? Of course not. So why would God tell Moses, I want you to take your sandals off? Anybody ever thought about that before?
Well, he explains it when he says you're on holy ground.
You're on holy ground, that's right. So what does sandals have to do with holy ground? Why would they need to come off in order to revere that holy ground, or the fact that he was in the presence of God? Sorry? Okay, you use your sandals when you walk around? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Okay, I think we're on the right track. As I was studying this, because it was interesting to me, and I thought to myself, what is this? What's the relevance of this? Apparently, from what I studied, what I understand, historically, and looking at some of these scholars and such, apparently in those times, taking off your sandals was kind of like you would take off a hat, right? You're sitting at a meal at a restaurant, you got a ball cap on, and you know, Dad would always say, Dalton, we're about to pray, do what with your hat? Take it off. Right? Maybe a lady comes in and she's sitting down at the table and a man stands up, or maybe a man has his hat on, he takes his hat and tips his hat. Or it's a gesture of reverence, of respect. And so when God tells Moses, take your sandals off, that was something that was a sign of respect. And so he wanted Moses to understand, you're in a place, you are standing on a ground that is godly ground, that is holy ground, and therefore I expect you to reverence me, to show me that respect. And it's interesting to me that one of the ways God expected Moses to do that was to take off his sandals, right? Why would God ask that of Moses if it didn't mean something to God? True or false, that communicated something to God by Moses taking his sandals off of his feet. True. All I'm wanting to get at tonight is for us to see that God makes a connection, that God understands that dress communicates even amongst ourselves. And in that case, God took something that was kind of cultural among men and expected Moses to show him that reverence that he understood as it meant. Let's keep going with this. Exodus 19 now. A couple of other just examples of this, how God kind of shows communication through dress. Exodus chapter 19. Maybe somebody else that's willing, read verses 9 and 10 this time. Exodus 19, 9 and 10.
And the Lord said unto Moses, Lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee, and believe thee forever. And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto the people, and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes.
Excellent. So here is God. He's coming down on Mount Sinai, and He requires that one of the things that the people do before He comes down to them and they stand in His presence is that they do what with their clothes? Wash their clothes. And the inference here is not only are they going to wash their clothes, but also their bodies as well. But nonetheless, it was specifically the clothes that He mentioned. Why would God want them to wash their clothes before they stand in His presence? What's that? They should be clean. They should be clean. Right? True or false? The way we treat our bodies, personal hygiene, those kinds of things, communicates to others how we view ourselves. Right? What do you think of, and we don't have this problem here now, but let's say somebody walks in and they sit down and their clothes are absolutely disgusting. They smell terrible. Their hair is a mess. They clearly are not taking care of themselves. What kind of image does that portray? What do you think when you see that? A number of things might come to mind, but what message would that portray to you? Homeless. Probably somebody that doesn't have a home. Somebody that, why do we default to the fact that that person probably doesn't have the ability to take care of themselves like we do? Because if they did, they would do it. They would care enough about, they would take care of themselves, right? God wanted these people to just to care about the way that they washed their clothes before they came before God. Again, this connection with the outfits, the clothing, and a reverence to God. And there was more to it than that. There's some symbolism here in being clean as you approach God, and we can't be near to God without being clean. I don't deny that either. But it's interesting that he would mention specifically the clothes, even over the body. Keep going, Exodus 39. And thoughts so far, I don't mean to ignore opportunities there if you have a thought on that particular passage. Exodus 39 this time. We won't take time to read the whole chapter, but really the whole chapter is about what we're going to find in verse 1. And the blue and the purple and the scarlet, they made cloths of service to do service in the holy place, and made the holy garments for Aaron as the Lord commanded Moses. What did God have to say about the attire that the high priest would wear when he would come to God and do the service in the tabernacle? Did God care what he had on? He did. He was very specific with what he was going to wear. Very specific. And it's incredible, all the details that go into this. Lots of symbolism now. Lots of symbolism. And I mentioned before, blue, purple, and red. You remember blue is associated with who? Do you remember? Ezekiel in a couple of places talks about what as being the color blue. God's throne. You remember that? God's throne is the color blue. And there are other references to God in blue. Blue is the color of deity throughout the Bible. And red is the color of blood. Blood, flesh, man, in other words. Red is the color of man. And I think we've talked about this before. At the tabernacle, what the priest wore, it was all about red, blue, and what was the third color? Purple. How do you get purple? What two colors do you put together? Red and blue. And so man, red, blue, God, come together, purple, and that is what the tabernacle was all about. God wanted to come down and be closer to who? To man. To man. And as you recall again, the robe, the purple robe placed on Jesus, that's not by chance. That's certainly God's providence involved there. To Jesus, it didn't mean royalty or mockery. To Him, it meant, I'm going to make blue and red come together. I really believe there was more to it than just the name of a purple, not a random thing at all. So God is very specific with the details of what He wanted His priest, His high priest in particular, to wear. One more that I find interesting. This one is not necessarily God's commandment so much as it is a servant's decision. Look at 1 Chronicles 15. 1 Chronicles chapter 15 this time. Verse number 25. 1 Chronicles 15, verse 25. Lots of pages I'm hearing being turned. Always encouraged by that. Can't say it enough. I'll give you another moment to get there. 1 Chronicles 15, 25. So David and the elders of Israel and the captains over thousands went to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the house of Obed-Edom with joy. All right? Remember Uzzah? He touched the ark. He passed. They took it, they dropped it off at Obed-Edom's house. Hey, we're not going to carry this ark if you're going to make a breach upon us, God. But they learned. God said, I don't want you carrying it on an ox cart. I want you carrying it on your shoulders, and particularly the sons of Kohath. Verse 26, descendants of Levi, as you remember. And it came to pass, when God helped the Levites that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, that they offered 7 bullocks and 7 rams. Right? They're moving the ark. They're worshiping God. Sacrifices. Verse 27. And David was clothed with a robe of fine linen, and all the Levites that bear the ark, and the singers, and Chenaniah, the master of song with the singers, David also had upon him an ephod of linen. Why did David take the time to put on this fine, fine robe this particular morning? Why do you think he did that? Out of respect. It communicated something, didn't it? He was, and we always put it this way, and rightly so, nothing wrong with that. He was giving his best to who? Sometimes we word it that way, giving Him your best. Again, not that you're just the worst sinner ever for wearing blue jeans, but there's a principle there. And so David says, hey, I'm going to give God we're going to be moving the ark. I'm thinking about God this morning, and I want to put on my best attire. That's something that communicated something to those around him, but also to God. Yes, ma'am. Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Absolutely. And she makes a good point there. White represents purity, and we were going to actually mention that in a moment, but just since we already mentioned it, at a wedding, what color dress 99.9% of the time is the wife going to wear? It's going to be white because it communicates purity. Which leads us to the next point, that it does in fact communicate to others. Our dress, what we wear, communicates to others. And that's part of what we just mentioned. I want to start in Proverbs 4 and remind us of something. And again, this is not just about what we wear to services. I want to also speak of this generally. We can talk about both areas, but Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. This is also, of course, not a lesson on modesty. We did that fairly recently, but that's included. All of the aspects of what we wear every day when we're out and about with others represents who we are. Proverbs 4:23. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. We understand this concept that what is within us is what's going to come out, right? We talked a little bit about in the past, especially with modesty, we talked about the package principle. Do you remember the package principle? Like at Christmas time, you've got a package and it's wrapped, and you pick up the package and you look at it and you shake it, and right, if it's a huge package, you know that it's probably not a pair of earrings. It's probably not a watch. Maybe it's a vacuum. Maybe it's a gym set to work out, whatever it is. It's a huge box. The package gives you an idea of what's on the inside. It doesn't tell you exactly what's there, but when you shake it and see it, you get an idea what might be inside. That's the package principle. I give people an idea of what's inside, what's in my heart, by the way that I dress. Again, you take someone who runs around half naked, that's not a good image of what's in that person's heart. Right? If I run around and I have a shirt, and I'll never forget it. I was probably in middle school. I mean, it was a long time ago, sadly. I was in middle school and I was at Six Flags Over Georgia, and a guy had a shirt on that had a foul word, and following that foul word was the name Jesus. I'll never forget it. He chose to put that shirt on, and nobody would see that shirt and think to themselves that what's on the inside of that man is a heart that loves his Lord. Nobody would think that. I just couldn't, I'll never forget that. I haven't to this day ever seen a shirt like that, and it seems like we're in worse times than we were then, but he was brave. In fact, security there came and forced him to turn his shirt inside out. I'll never forget that. I don't know if they do that today or not, but they did then. But clothes, what we wear communicates what's on the inside. And so that's important, that's significant. Well, why do I say that? Look at Esther chapter 4. Let's turn to the next passage here. Esther chapter 4. Again, we're talking about effectively representing Jesus the Christ. That's what this study is all about. Esther chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. This particular point is about communicating to others. This is something you see, we could go to a lot of passages to read about this, but this is just the particular one I chose to go to. Esther 4 and verse 1. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. A lot of times in the Old Testament, we see folks rip their clothes and put on sackcloth. And their reference to having that sackcloth and in ashes, what does that represent? What does that communicate, or did that communicate in their time when folks would put on that sackcloth? It would represent a repentance. It would represent also a mourning, a sorrow associated with that. There was some kind of negative that happened, something negative. And so there was a sorrow and oftentimes a repentance. Verse 2, and it came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Verse 4, one more. So Esther's maid and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai, to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Why did Esther send Mordecai an extra set of clothes? She didn't want him wearing that sackcloth, did she? Because that was communicating what? As soon as she heard Mordecai was wearing sackcloth, she wanted him to change clothes, because it was communicating to her what about Mordecai? He was grieving. It was a sad thing. What they wore communicated something. Think about, we mentioned weddings already. The white dress, that communicates something. What's another place, another event where color or a particular something represents or symbolizes something that we communicate amongst ourselves? Black at a funeral. Is that what you were going to say, brother? Graduation, yeah. Graduation as well. But black at a funeral, the opposite of white, right? We often wear black at a funeral to represent what? Represent mourning, a sorrow for the family, a bit of respect even that we're paying to them. I saw a hand somewhere. Larry?
A red t-shirt with a G on it.
A red t-shirt with a G on it. That's right. If I wear that, that communicates something, right? Now don't tell me what you think it communicates. You got a bad team. It's true. It's true. Boy, don't get me started on that one. That's right. But it's true, right? There are certain places that we go, certain ways that we might communicate that. One other thought on this particular point. Go over to 1 Timothy 2. 1 Timothy 2 for a moment. We're going to keep this in its proper context. And again, just to making sure that we continue to grow and learn and we remember things. 1 Timothy 2, in that discussion about modesty, is it in reference to having or wearing too little or too much? 1 Timothy 2. What's the real context here? Too much. The context is actually too much. There's still a principle that applies. That idea in verse 9 of shamefacedness, the ability to blush, certainly would apply to not wearing as much clothes as you should too. But verse 10 is the key for this particular study. What they wear, what women choose to wear in this context, which, in parenthetical statement here, which becometh women professing godliness with good works. What is he saying about the attire that women wear? It should what? Profess godliness. What does the word profess mean? That's it. Represent. Literally, the Greek word literally means to announce. Like a public announcement. I love that. That's exactly what it means. When she is out in public, her attire should profess godliness. And that means a number of things, but one, it means to not profess something other than godliness, right? To not wear too much, right? What happens when you see somebody? Now, I'm not talking about a little bit of makeup and a ring or something. That's not immodest in our society. But let's say you find somebody and they've got the 6 earrings in both ears and one in the nose and the tongue, and right? What does that profess? Does that profess godliness? No. That's what Paul's talking about. You can overdo it. There was a guy I knew from Georgia that was a car salesman. He had 4 rings on each of these 4 fingers, huge gold rings on both hands. Would you say that's overdoing it a bit? That's a little immodest, I would say. Right, we can go overboard. If somebody was to walk in, ladies, with their hair did with a diamond tiara and a big diamond hanging from their neck and diamonds around their wrist, I bet that would be awesome for the woman. I bet she'd be having a blast. But would that be modest? No, right? So it applies both ways. I can communicate gaudiness. I can communicate arrogance or wealth, and there's so many ways that we can communicate with our attire. But our clothes profess something. And both women and men, this should be true of. It should be professing, of course, godliness, good things. Any thoughts so far? I'm doing a lot of the hogging of the time here. Any thoughts on this particular point about communicating to others, or something we may have overlooked before?
Wedding rings professes something.
That's right. Wedding ring. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. Wedding ring professes something, doesn't it? What does a wedding ring profess? You're married. That's right. Right. A guy goes into the club or to the bar and decides he's going to take his ring off. Right. What might be he professing? I'm interested. I'm not being very faithful to my spouse. Right. That's right. I'm available. Right. In fact, 1 Corinthians 11 talks about the head coverings. Very, very comparable to what was going on in their custom. That head covering represented a subjection to a husband. And so the ring kind of works in a very similar, not exactly the same, but a very similar way today. And so we could violate 1 Corinthians 11 by not having that ring on our finger at the inappropriate times. Aaron?
I sort of, you can also equate it to the secular business world, where your level of dress represents your motivation. At your job as well as like your position at your job, the executives will wear a shirt and tie, and then you'll get down to the mid-level where there'll be, usually business casual with the polo and slacks, and then
Yep.
And on down it goes, and that's the way it is in several jobs. And that'll also communicate something to others, like the way you look when you're working, and everything from your posture to your dress will represent your mood when you're at work.
That's very true. In fact, studies have been done on this. But Aaron's talking about, take a business or a corporation, and you run into the CEO in the office. What's he going to be wearing? Shorts and flip-flops, right? Yeah, definitely. He's going to be dressed up. But as you kind of go down the hierarchy of that job and maybe get down to some of the new recruits or the peons of the company, and maybe they're not dressed up as much. And so there's I guess you could say, professionalism to a statement of professionalism when you attire. You go to a place or restaurant or something, you ask for a manager. Is he normally dressed up a little more so than the rest of the employees? Naturally, he is. Why did the big guys do that? I don't know why I'm grabbing my coat like I'm not. But why do that? I happen to have a coat on. Why do those guys, the CEOs and the managers, and why do they wear a suit and tie? Why do they do that? Yeah, it says something, doesn't it? I'm in charge, right? I'm in charge. And normally, not always, but normally, some of the nicer folks in that place are going to be those that are in those positions, and that's one of the reasons they got there. That's not always true, but usually a manager is a little more pleasant to deal with a lot of times than others. But there's a professing there. I saw a hand over here. I didn't mean to ignore you. Mr. Renee? There you go. That's right. Private property. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Think about, too, for a moment, another way we might apply this naturally, or at least I'm this way. I think most people are still like this, but if you were to go to a job interview, would you think about what you were going to wear? You do. And again, not that it's wrong to wear shorts to an interview, but why do you think about what you're going to wear? Why does that matter at a job interview? You want to make a good first impression. Again, just because clothes profess something. Right? Clothes profess something. It says to them, hey, I cared enough to not wear shorts and flip-flops, or gym shorts and flip-flops to come into an interview, right? And if you were hiring somebody, do you think you would naturally, just by appearance, do you think it would affect you as an employer based upon what they wore? If somebody comes in to be a secretary and they're wearing shorts and flip-flops, would that make a negative impression on you? I think it would. So we can understand that. Naturally, we can understand how that works. Third one here, and this goes right back to what Aaron was just saying, leads us right into this next point. Thirdly, it communicates something to ourselves. There have been some studies done on this, and I think this is kind of what Aaron was alluding to. In companies, have you ever heard of Casual Friday? Casual Friday? There's been some studies done, and maybe you knew this, but in particular, these companies, when folks dress down to work on Friday, what do you think happens to their productivity? It goes down. Almost all the time. In every case, when they have studied this, companies, in fact, there are some places that are starting to call it, it just left me. It was, I want to say Professional Friday, but I think it started with an A, Fancy Friday or something like that, where they've done the opposite, where they want people to dress up on Friday instead of dress down. Some companies are doing that. Why? Because what you're wearing affects how you feel. If you were to go into work every day in gym shorts and flip-flops, I don't know really, I guess, why it is this way, but naturally we just kind of feel more relaxed, more not motivated necessarily, not as professional, and it's incredible the effect that the outfits can have. Let's say you're leaving from services on Sunday, you go into a restaurant and you're standing in line. Have you ever noticed that people will treat you differently based upon what you're wearing? Have you ever had somebody maybe on a Sunday for lunch that was really nice to you and you thought maybe normally when you're in there they're not? It communicates something to ourselves that same way. We just sometimes feel better. Women especially. Help me out here, ladies. True or false, when you get, let's say you're going to, not a ball, but something where you get dressed up. You're going out with your husband and you buy a new dress, and I'm not talking about a gaudy, but just a nice new dress, and maybe he's got you a nice modest necklace, and you go out and you do your hair, and true or false, ladies, you feel really good about yourself that day, that night. That means something to you. It communicates something. Maybe guys not quite as much in that regard, but definitely, ladies, we can connect. You can. I shouldn't say we. Miss Becker.
Being born and raised up north and moving down here, I've been down here now for 6 years, and I'll tell you, there is a difference. The dress down here is more casual across
Is that right?
all lines than it is up north.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Maybe because it's warmer down here.
Well, that's true. That's true.
It's really, I have really noticed that a lot of the difference, even in professionals.
Interesting. Yeah. It is. It's somewhat cultural too, isn't it? Communication. It's not like God has set in motion that a tie represents professionalism. It's just a cultural thing. We've kind of deemed it that way. But still, we see God seeing that communication and that the fact that He noticed in the Old Testament, what people were wearing, and something to think about. I saw Mr. McDaniel first, and then we'll go to Aaron.
Kind of works in reverse in some rural places in Tennessee where you go in and if someone had a tie on,
Yep.
they were trying to show off or trying to be
That's true. Yeah.
ahead of the place.
That's right.
And oh man, you better not.
You better not do that. I've never been to one, but I've heard, I think they're called cowboy churches. That's like a very casual. No, they're not casual?
No, cowboy churches are something entirely different.
Oh, okay.
Churches are you bring your horse to church, and you dress, seriously,
But they dress casual, right, to their...
they dress cowboy.
Oh, they dress cowboy, literally cowboy. Okay.
They have dances and they have all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
They have little service. Tennessee is I mean, rural churches in Tennessee are, I mean, it's a different mindset. And this is not even today. I mean, it used to be this way.
Okay. Okay.
Different mindset. It's like you don't want to be seen to trying to outdo your neighbor. You want to be humble. And you don't want to, maybe some part of the people who attend, maybe they don't have a coat and tie.
Yeah.
Clean. They don't have a coat and tie. And so it's a kind of humbleness.
Exactly. A humility.
It's not disrespect, showing disrespect to God, but it's kind of humbleness. But it is, I mean, it is different.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And if you went to a congregation like that, I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with dressing whatever the way that everybody's dressing. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I agree with you completely. Sorry, Aaron was next, and then we'll keep going.
It depends on the environment too.
Yeah, sure.
You don't see the dudes building roads and wearing a suit and tie. That's just
Exactly.
Black t-shirt and jeans. My first IT job, I worked on a 24-hour rotation in a call center, and the rules were you could be pretty fast and loose, but man, overnight, you wouldn't go in even khaki shorts. When I worked overnight, I wanted to be comfortable because it was a long time.
That's right.
Calls.
Definitely.
I'd wear, a t-shirt that wasn't trashy or anything, and then something comfortable to get me through the night, because that was complimental at that time. But it also, going back to the communicating something to yourself, whenever you throw on your shirt and tie, I usually, for me personally, I only do that for Sundays and Wednesdays, but it gets me pumped and it gets me ready to go and head to church and shake some hands and get ready, get in the mindset to worship God. It's just part of that process. And that personally, with your point of communicating something to yourself, I'm using that to communicate to myself that hey, we need to get out the door and it's time to put yourself in the right mindset to worship.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great example. Miss Spivey.
Going along with what Ms. Margaret was saying and Aaron was saying, the slides, but I was thinking about it during the class with Abraham and taking the sandals off and the Israelites and washing their clothes and the high priest wearing their robe and stuff.
Yes.
Everything was appropriate to their situation.
Exactly.
Something they were able to do.
Exactly. And you notice, at the Mount, it wasn't that God told them exactly what they had to wear, but whatever they were wearing needed to be clean. So there's lots of different, every situation was different. David chose, personally, he chose to wear his best. God didn't tell him he had to do that, but he chose to do that because of that communication we're talking about. So, everything that's being said is spot on. There was another hand, Miss Bev, yes.
Well, if you want a nice, cool looking picture, Kevin Walker has one on Facebook, and it's really good looking. It says,
Watch out, Bill.
"Ready for worship." I think it says my best.
He does that every time, doesn't he? Yep. Kevin always takes a photo and puts on there, and he gets a lot of likes, and he does that for a reason, but he does. If you see that on Facebook, he'll always have a picture. I guess it's Marilyn that takes it. His hands are by his side, so it's not a selfie, but somebody's taking it, and he'll post it on there, and say he's ready for worship, and he's always got his suit and tie on when he does that. You have another thought?
There's a whole subculture throughout the
Yeah,
So
exactly.
That's sort of how they view the status. You know, they're not in, they're in separate partners.
Exactly. That's true. And by the way, if I may add to that point, we should never, when, somebody, let's say we have a visitor that comes in, and you wouldn't do this, but just to make sure you know that I wouldn't say that either. Somebody comes in and they're wearing, let's say they're wearing shorts and flip-flops, and, we should never just look at that individual and say, man, they just didn't give God their best this morning. That may be the best they have. I know realistically, in today's, society, it's probably pretty unlikely that, especially, now maybe a stranger, but with us at this congregation, it's very unlikely that, the way we eat out and the things that we do, that we couldn't afford a tie if we, it's not usually a financial thing, but there may be someone that doesn't have a tie, that doesn't have a coat, because those are a little more expensive than a pair of shorts, gym shorts, or whatever they might be wearing. So I don't want to encourage us to look at someone else and try to judge what their heart is by what they're wearing. What I'm wanting to approach is that we as individuals think about the message we send with what we wear when we get up in the morning and when we go out into public to services or to our jobs or whatever we might be doing. Carlos?
Yeah, and I like to just make the point, somewhat in contrast to the, what's mostly been said. The idea that really we're getting to is that this whole process, there is no uniform
right.
that Christians wear. There's no
Exactly.
Christian uniform. The uniformity is in the heart, as in our response to all of these other spiritual principles that we've been discussing. That's where the uniformity comes in. And one of the things, because a lot of times you have people who are very religious, all the way to cults. And what do they do? They try to create external uniformity so that it breaks down the individual, and so that you lose your individuality to the group. And I don't think that's what God is really trying to get us to do. We have to, manage a number of principles simultaneously.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to come to, but it really is mostly, in our heart, and then the right thing will come forward. But we don't all have to dress like we're in some sort of robot academy,
Yeah.
and just coming out. That's not. And I know I've personally seen such, of course, cults. You can easily see anybody who's observed cults. That's what they do.
Yeah.
But I've actually seen that, in some aspects of the Lord's church where there's pressure. Not a matter of shirt or tie, but the kind of professional casual shirt, the exact model, the exact make.
Yeah, same exact thing.
And if the other guys are not wearing that one, they look at him askance. I've seen that.
Yeah.
And we don't ever want to see that in the Lord's church.
Exactly. We got enough folks that try to say we're a cult anyways, don't we? David?
About judgment.
Yes.
Like Matthew 7:1-2, it talks about judgment and not to judge someone and take the plank out of your own eye.
Right.
Well, also in John it says to judge the righteousness.
Exactly.
Who's right or wrong. And for example, somebody having a naked woman on her shirt, or some vulgar statement on her shirt, we are to judge that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because that's not right. We need to judge the righteousness of what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, judging what's in somebody's heart because they're wearing shorts versus judging what's in somebody's heart because they have a naked woman. There's a big difference. That's righteous judgment to say that that's wrong. Larry, did you have your hand up? And then Aaron.
It's amazing to me how culture dictates what is acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, if we had bought a pair of jeans for our kids that had a hole in it, and several holes in it, brought it home, they would have said, what in the world am I going to do with this? If you go to Dillard's or any other store and buy a pair of jeans, and you're going to pay $70 or $80 for a pair of jeans that would have been thrown in the trash a few years ago. But culture says, you don't want to dress up. You want to, I guess, show your independence. I never have understood why. You would wear jeans that have holes all over.
Guilty. I remember in high school, that was the thing to do. And I would take a hat and take a knife to my brand new hat, and I would cut the front of that bill and tatter it because that was the cool thing to do. And so I had tattered hats all the time. And But yeah, Aaron, I think, was next, and then we got very quickly. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead.
What Larry said and then what David and Carlos said right quick, it is getting increasingly difficult for women to find clothes because they change the trend so much.
Yes.
You'll wind up looking, I apologize for this, but trashier and trashier.
Mhm.
And it is hard, especially if you are a parent of a young woman to find appropriate clothing. And then, but with the judging, I absolutely agree with that as well. There is no uniform, but it's that they're here is the most important part. Whether you're in shorts or flip flops or in like me, we had to turn around and combine into one truck and head here because Sarah had a meeting late, so I'm still in my work clothes. But here, that's the important part.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and that's the motivation that we should be encouraged by instead of necessarily the dress at all times.
Exactly, exactly. Somebody gets off at work and they literally just have enough time to get here. Wear what you got and come on. We want you to be here for sure. And man, there's so many. Very quick, we got 1 minute left. But Miss Becker and then Mr. McDaniel.
I was going to say, one of my favorite shows on TV is The Voice. And
Yes.
the reason I like that over these other shows is what they call their blind auditions. The contestants come out, the judges have their backs to them. They
Yeah.
aren't judging them on what they see,
But what they hear.
judging them on what they hear.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting illustration. Mr. McDaniel?
Maybe you could comment about Jesus and the Pharisees, the long rows,
Yes.
that maybe it's not so much the long road, but the attitude that brought about the long.
Exactly. It is. It's about the attitude that brought them out in the long robe. You're exactly right. And again, you remember the priest, even though they had those long robes on, they had to wear, the King James Version calls them under breeches, because if they were going to be standing up above folks, they had to think about the fact that they were covered. They were covering their nakedness. One thing I have to say quickly, and I'm not doing this so you don't get to respond, but I just something to think about, something that was shared with me, and then I'll hush. Sunday morning versus Sunday night. One thing to mention about this, one of the problems, one of the things we ought to be careful about, I believe, is to not put a difference between Sunday morning and Sunday night. We're bad, and I say we, I've been there, and I had somebody tell me, and I thought about it, and we really have a habit of dressing down from Sunday morning to Sunday night. And doesn't matter what you wear, but it does matter when you seem to put an emphasis on one over the other, because we have a hard enough time on Sunday nights as it is, showing the world that that's an important time to be here too. And so when I dress down for Sunday night, it seems to give a bad representation of the reality, because Sunday night and Sunday morning are the exact same thing. They're both an opportunity to worship God. So be careful, I guess is what I'm saying, on how we communicate to others based on what we wear Sunday morning versus Sunday night. It's not picking on anybody, I promise. Just something to think about. Appreciate your time so much and attention. And if you want to give me some feedback on that one, I know you do, then we'll talk a little bit afterwards.